It was supposed to be a simple dinner. I had just turned 23, my first birthday as a full-time employee with my own apartment, paying my own bills, building my own life. All I really wanted was a call, a hug, a small cake maybe. Instead, I got radio silence. My parents didn't forget. They just didn't care. They posted a picture of my brother's dog wearing a birthday hat, captioned, "Look who's the birthday boy." I stared at the post for 5 straight minutes, blinking, trying to understand if it was some kind of joke. It wasn't. There was no text from them, no call, not even a sarcastic emoji. 3 days later, I went home, not to celebrate, but to get closure. I walked through that familiar door hoping maybe they'd say sorry, that they just got busy. I asked calmly, "Why did you skip my birthday?" My mother didn't even look up from her phone. "Because we don't celebrate drama," she said flatly. My father muttered, "You always make everything about you." My hands started to tremble, not from anger, but from a quiet kind of grief. I repeated, "So me asking for acknowledgement is drama?" Then the slap came. My father, the man who used to rock me to sleep, raised his hand like I was a stranger. My head snapped sideways. My mother stood and pointed toward the door. "Out!" she hissed. "You've ruined enough of this family." I didn't move. I couldn't. My cheek was burning and my heart felt hollow. "Why?" I whispered, tears slipping down my face. "Why does he get everything and I get this?" My brother, who had been lounging on the couch in his branded tracksuit, laughed. "Because I don't whine for attention, I earn it." I walked out that night barefoot, my shoes still by the door where I left them in hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd walk back out with a sliver of love. Instead, I left with a bruise and the bitter taste of truth. But life didn't end at that doorstep. It began. Because something broke in me that day. Not in the tragic sense, in the liberating one. The kind of break that cracks open all the lies you were raised on and forces you to start again from your own truth. And I did. It was supposed to be a simple dinner. I had just turned 23, my first birthday as a full-time employee with my own apartment, paying my own bills, building my own life. All I really wanted was a call, a hug, a small cake maybe. Instead, I got radio silence. My parents didn't forget. They just didn't care. They posted a picture of my brother's dog wearing a birthday hat, captioned, "Look who's the birthday boy." I stared at the post for 5 straight minutes, blinking, trying to understand if it was some kind of joke. It wasn't. There was no text from them. No call, not even a sarcastic emoji. 3 days later, I went home, not to celebrate, but to get closure. I walked through that familiar door hoping maybe they'd say sorry, that they just got busy. I asked calmly, "Why did you skip my birthday?" My mother didn't even look up from her phone. "Because we don't celebrate drama," she said flatly. My father muttered, "You always make everything about you." My hands started to tremble, not from anger, but from a quiet kind of grief. I repeated, "So me asking for acknowledgement is drama?" Then the slap came. My father, the man who used to rock me to sleep, raised his hand like I was a stranger. My head snapped sideways. My mother stood and pointed toward the door. "Out!" she hissed. "You've ruined enough of this family." I didn't move. I couldn't. My cheek was burning, and my heart felt hollow. "Why?" I whispered, tears slipping down my face. "Why does he get everything and I get this?" My brother, who had been lounging on the couch in his branded tracksuit, laughed. "Because I don't whine for attention, I earn it." I walked out that night barefoot, my shoes still by the door where I left them in hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd walk back out with a sliver of love. Instead, I left with a bruise and the bitter taste of truth. As I stood outside in the cold night, my phone buzzed. A notification. My parents had just uploaded another photo. My brother again, this time holding a new car key. "Proud of our boy's big promotion," the caption read. He worked at a startup. I knew for a fact he got fired last month. Lies wrapped in gold foil as always. I looked down at my reflection in a dark puddle. Mascara smeared, lips split slightly, dignity shattered. But strangely, I felt something stir inside me. A clarity, a promise. I promised myself I would never beg them for love again. I slept at a friend's place that night. A small one-bedroom apartment shared with her cat, and 3 plants named after Harry Potter characters. It was chaotic, but warm. And for the first time in months, someone asked me how I felt, not what I achieved. The next morning I got up early. I made a list. Things I'd do for myself, things that would never depend on their approval again. I enrolled in a weekend MBA course. I applied to a grant program for women entrepreneurs. I even took myself out for pancakes and wrote a birthday letter to myself. No one else would honor me, so I would. And I would make sure that one day they'd hear my name not in a text begging for attention, but in the headlines, wondering how the daughter they cast out built something too big for them to ignore. Because if love wasn't going to build me, maybe spite would. And sometimes that's enough to start. The silence from my parents didn't surprise me anymore. A week had passed since I walked out of their house, my cheek still faintly marked, and not once did they call. But that silence became my fuel. I poured every ounce of heartbreak into building something of my own. I applied for night shifts at a cafe downtown, picking up extra hours on weekends, and I used that income to pay for my MBA textbooks. By day, I worked in logistics at a small delivery firm, often unnoticed, rarely appreciated, but I was learning, watching, growing. Every missed call from them became another page in my future success story. Meanwhile, my brother paraded around social media like royalty. He posted photos of himself at rooftop bars, posing next to luxury cars he didn't own, celebrating career wins that weren't real. My parents flooded every post with hearts and clapping emojis. "So proud of you, son. Keep making us shine." The same people who once said I talked too much every time I shared even a minor success in school. The same parents who told me graduating magna cum laude wasn't impressive because nobody cares about degrees anymore. But now, I did have a degree, and a plan, and fire in my veins. One rainy evening, I saw a job posting at a logistics startup called JetSpine, a fast-growing company run by a quiet but respected CEO named Greg Harper. I'd read about him in Forbes once. He built his empire from scratch, much like I was trying to. I wrote a cover letter so passionate, I cried 3 times writing it. A week later, I got an interview. 2 weeks after that, I was hired. It started small, inventory coordination. But Greg noticed something in me. One afternoon, I stayed late to redesign an inefficient delivery schedule using my MBA material, even though it wasn't in my job description. The next day, he called me into his office. "You're wasted in that chair," he said. "You think like a manager." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever told me I was more than what I appeared to be. He promoted me the following week. That's when things began to shift. I started to climb, slowly, intentionally. Greg became a mentor, someone who saw through the mask I wore and handed me the tools to rebuild without shame. I began managing a small team. Then, when our regional manager resigned, I was asked to step in temporarily. That temporary lasted 2 months, then 3. Then Greg made it permanent. The irony? My brother had been lying about his job all along. His promotion was a side gig managing an Instagram account for a pool cleaning business. And the CEO of that business? A client of ours at JetSpine. One day, at a quarterly networking brunch, Greg asked me to join him at the executive table. I arrived in a navy blue suit, the same one I had bought secondhand and tailored myself. When I walked in, I saw the guest list and nearly choked. My brother was on it, and so was the owner of his so-called company. I said nothing. I just smiled and poured myself a mimosa. As the brunch began, Greg turned to me. "That's the guy we were talking about, right? The one your team flagged for contract issues?" I nodded, heart pounding. "He submitted a proposal with doctored numbers," I said, "flagged by compliance." Greg frowned. "Let's make sure he never gets a dime from us again." I didn't look at my brother. I didn't have to. I could feel the heat crawling up his neck from across the room. Later that night, my parents called. I stared at my screen. Missed call, Mom. Missed call, Dad. Text. "He says you embarrassed him at some event." "Is that true?" I didn't reply. Instead, I texted Greg. "Can we talk about expanding our training program for young women in logistics?" He wrote back immediately. "Let's make it happen. I'm proud of you." And just like that, I realized I didn't need their approval. I already had something better: respect, purpose, and the power to make real change. Months passed, and my rise in jet spine became impossible to ignore. I was now director of operations, with my own office overlooking the skyline, a view I used to daydream about while folding laundry in the basement of my parents' house. Every inch of it felt earned. Every pen, every paperweight, every sunrise through that glass window reminded me I had built this life with grit they never respected. And now, the ones who dismissed me were beginning to realize they needed me. The first real crack appeared when my father called out of the blue. Not a text, not a voicemail, an actual call. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was uncharacteristically soft. "Hey, kiddo," he said, "your mother's been not well lately, and I've had some setbacks. Your brother's been busy, you know how it is. We could use some help." I stared at the wall in front of me. The same man who once said my degree was just a paper no one would take seriously was now calling the person he dismissed, the daughter he pushed aside, to ask for support. "What kind of help?" I asked flatly. "Well, just advice," he said. "Maybe even some short-term assistance. We might lose the house." The house. The same one where they celebrated my brother's every minor achievement and skipped my birthdays without blinking. The same house where my bedroom was used for storage because you're never around anyway. The same place where I last heard my father raise his hand, not to praise me, but to strike me when I questioned why they didn't come to my graduation. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and nothing more. He paused. "Is that all?" I waited, then replied, "I hope Mom feels better," and hung up. A week later, my brother emailed me. No greeting, just, "Heard you're close with Greg Harper. Can you put in a good word for me? I need a job." The irony. The man who once laughed behind my back, who joked that I played dress-up in a fake career, now wanted me to pull strings. So I called Greg into my office. "There's a candidate reaching out," I said, handing him the email without a name. "Would you consider him?" Greg read it, raised a brow, and asked, "Is this your brother?" I nodded. Greg smiled faintly. "You want my honest opinion?" "Always." "He wouldn't last a week, but I'll follow your lead." And I said, "Let's pass." Greg nodded. "That's what I thought you'd say." I didn't reject my brother out of spite. I rejected him because I'd seen what empty entitlement looked like, and I wasn't going to feed it, not after what it cost me. The next day, my mother called. She left a voicemail this time, crying softly into the phone. "We were wrong. Your father and I, we should have seen you. You've become everything we never imagined. We're proud of you. Please come home." but home was no longer that crumbling house filled with judgment and favoritism. Home was here, in this office, in this silence I had earned, in the respect that now greeted me when I walked into boardrooms, not because I had demanded it, but because I had become undeniable. I sat at my desk, staring at the flashing red voicemail light on the phone. 4 unheard messages. I didn't need to play them. I knew what they were. Apologies dressed in desperation. Tears that only appeared when the consequences did. But I wasn't in the business of rescuing people who left me drowning. Still, I wasn't heartless. I drafted an email, short, polite, professional. I'm unable to assist at this time. Wishing you the best. I stared at the words for a while before hitting send. And once I did, I leaned back, breathing deeply. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. That was the power I had gained. A few days later, I got a text from my cousin Alyssa, one of the only family members who ever treated me like a real person. "Did you see it?" she wrote, followed by a screenshot. It was a GoFundMe page. Title, "Help Us Save the Family Home." Goal, $120,000. Organizer, my brother. I scrolled past photos of the peeling porch, the sagging roof, and paragraphs painting my parents as loving, struggling victims. Not a word about me, not a word about how they used their money for my brother's business, for vacations, for party after party while I worked night shifts to afford textbooks. And then I saw the comments. "Such a sweet family. They deserve all the help they can get. You should be proud of your son." My stomach twisted. Not from bitterness, from the sheer absurdity. They had built a narrative where I never existed, a silent child erased from the family photo. Again. But this time I had the power to write my own version. The next week, JetSpine's CEO, Greg, asked me to join him on a panel for women in leadership. Cameras, reporters, a packed auditorium. I sat beside him on stage, answering questions about resilience, about rising through silence. During the Q&A, a woman asked, "What would you say to people who never believed in you?" I smiled. "I wouldn't say anything," I replied. "I'd let them sit in the silence they created, because sometimes silence is the loudest truth." The room applauded, and backstage, Greg clapped my shoulder and said, "I knew the moment I hired you. You weren't just qualified. You were built for more." Later that night, I received another message from my father. No greeting, no excuses. Just 5 words. "Your brother lost the house." I didn't reply, but I slept peacefully, knowing I had finally built a life they couldn't control, rewrite, or delete. The next morning, I sat on my balcony, watching the city wake up while sipping my coffee from a mug that read, "CEO in Heels." A small, quiet smile played on my lips. For years, I had begged for crumbs of validation from people who fed banquets to my brother. Now, I didn't need their praise. I had something better, peace, purpose, and a power they never saw coming. Later that week, a courier delivered a large envelope to my office. No return address. Inside was a thick folder, financial statements, legal documents, handwritten notes. I flipped through them carefully. They were from my father. A full confession of misusing money that was in my name, rerouting college savings, secretly signing my name on old tax filings to qualify for business loans. My name, my credit. "I thought you'd never amount to anything," the final note read. "But now, you're the only one who can save us. Please, the house is already gone." I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I laughed. Not loudly, not out of mockery. It was the laugh of someone who had been buried alive and clawed their way out, only to watch their gravediggers beg for a hand. I called my lawyer. He reviewed everything and then looked up at me. "You want to pursue charges?" "No," I said slowly. "I want them to know they were lucky I healed. Because if I hadn't, This would be court, not closure. That weekend, I drove past the old family home. A different car in the driveway, new curtains in the windows, the realtor's sign gone. It didn't sting. It didn't even feel like a loss. That place had never been mine, even when I lived there. Instead, I drove to a bookstore downtown, one I used to sit outside of, dreaming of better. I bought every single copy of a book called Daughters Who Rise, not because I needed them, but because I wanted to donate them to a girls' shelter. As I left the store, I ran into a familiar face. My brother. He looked thinner, hunched, no designer suit, just a hoodie, eyes bloodshot. "We lost everything," he said, voice cracking. "Dad said you could help." I looked him dead in the eye. "You mean like I asked for help when I couldn't afford lunch in college, and you said I should have worked harder?" He swallowed hard. "That was different." "No," I said gently. "It wasn't." He stood there waiting, but I turned and walked away. I didn't need revenge, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. As I walked away from him, the weight that once clung to my shoulders dissolved like morning fog. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I was the one they underestimated, and that was their biggest mistake. My heels clicked against the pavement like a quiet anthem of freedom. People passed me by, unaware of the history I carried and the legacy I was rewriting with every step. I reached my car and paused, glancing at the reflection in the window. I saw a woman who had fought battles no one acknowledged and still chose to build rather than break. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my father. "You were always the strong one." I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Strength wasn't in proving them wrong. It was in building a life that no longer needed their approval. I hadn't spoken to them in over a year when the accident happened. My brother called me out of nowhere, a number I had long deleted, a voice I never expected to hear again. He didn't even say hello, just blurted, "It's Mom." Dad, too. Car crash. I see you. For a moment, the world fell still. I stared at the screen, listening to his shallow breathing, waiting for the punchline. But there wasn't one, just reality knocking at my door. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I simply put my phone down and brewed tea, because for every birthday they forgot, every slap they justified, every tear they dismissed, I owed them no urgency. When I finally arrived at the hospital, the nurse at the reception desk blinked twice. "Are you the daughter?" I nodded. "They've been asking for you." I walked into that sterile humming room like a ghost, returning to haunt the living. My father was bandaged, barely able to move. My mother had bruises and a neck brace. Their eyes welled up when they saw me, as if my presence alone could save them. "Sweetheart," my mom whispered, reaching out. "We need you," my dad added with a cracked voice. "We can't do this alone." I pulled the chair closer but didn't sit. I just looked at them, hard. "You beat me when I asked why you missed my birthday," I said, calm, clear. "You made me feel like a mistake." Their expressions crumpled. My mother covered her mouth, tears spilling. My father looked away. "We were wrong," he said. "We didn't know how to show love." "Not knowing doesn't excuse hurting," I replied. "You missed every chance to choose me. Now you're here because you've run out of options, not because you remember who I am." There was no anger in my voice, just a finality they weren't ready for. They begged me to help, pay medical bills, arrange home care, take over the house while they recovered. But I had already moved on. I wasn't the helpless girl crying on the bathroom floor anymore. I had become the woman no one saw coming. And the next thing I did made sure they would never forget that again. 2 days after visiting them at the hospital, I made an appointment with the hospital's financial department. I wanted to know exactly who had been listed as next of kin, who was responsible for their bills, and what their insurance would cover. It didn't surprise me to learn they had listed my name, assuming, of course, I would pick up where their parental love had failed them. But I declined, formally, in writing. I left a note for the attending nurse. I am not responsible for their care. They made it clear years ago that I wasn't family. When I walked out of that building, something lifted off my chest. For once, I wasn't the one bleeding for people who never bled for me. A week later, I received a frantic voicemail from my brother. "They're being discharged early. The hospital says they need full-time care. Where are you? They have no one else." Exactly. They had no one else because they'd burned every bridge that could have held them steady. So I didn't call back, I didn't text. Instead, I arranged for a small package to be delivered to their home. The one they once forced me to clean during their dinner parties. The one I was never allowed to decorate, to touch, to feel like my own. Inside the box was a birthday card, blank, except for one line in my handwriting. This is what it felt like. Later that week, I drove by their house and saw it. Dark windows, unkempt yard, the mailbox stuffed full. The mighty had fallen. Not because I pushed them, but because they had spent their lives stepping on the only child who might have caught them. That night, I sat in my own home, my safe, quiet space, surrounded by my photos, my plants, my warmth. No yelling, no footsteps that made me flinch, no cruel words echoing from down the hallway. Just me, free. And I knew then they'd created a storm, but I had become the eye. A few weeks later, I heard from my aunt, the only one who had ever shown me a sliver of warmth growing up. She called with a shaky voice, saying, "Your parents are living in a motel now. Your dad can't walk without help, and your mom, she barely speaks." I didn't say anything. She continued, "They've been asking for you. They think you might forgive." Forgive? The people who forgot my birthday year after year? The ones who called me a mistake in the middle of dinner? The ones who bruised me and still expected obedience? I asked her calmly, "Aunt Linda, where were you when they locked me outside in the rain for coming home 5 minutes late?" Silence. Where was anyone when I was 16, bleeding from a split lip, forced to tell teachers I'd fallen down the stairs? Where were they when I cried alone in my room, while the rest of the family sang at my brother's birthday dinner? Silence again. I didn't hang up. I just let the silence grow until she whispered, "I'm sorry." I was tired of apologies, especially from those who only found their voice once the house had collapsed. Later that night, I stood in my hallway looking at the birthday photo my best friend had taken of me last year. Candles, cake, people who loved me genuinely. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. My home was built with love, not control, with laughter, not fear. And then I made a decision. I went to a notary and signed a statement legally severing contact. Power of attorney? Gone. Next of kin? Revoked. Medical contact? Removed. If they needed someone to lean on, they'd have to look somewhere else. Maybe at the son they always bragged about. And I sent them one final thing. A copy of my graduation photo, framed beautifully with a quote beneath it. "The daughter you forgot learned how to remember herself." They hadn't just missed my birthday, they had missed my life. And now they would miss the rest of it. I didn't expect a reply, but I got one. A handwritten letter arrived a week later, shaky penmanship betraying my father's trembling hands. It began with, "We didn't know how to love you right. We thought being hard on you would prepare you for the world. We were wrong." I stared at the letter for a while, not sure whether to feel anger or sorrow. Was it guilt? Or just fear that I had finally become too powerful to control? There was a photo tucked inside, an old one from when I was 5, sitting at the edge of the family picnic blanket, almost cropped out of the frame. My brother, centered, with chocolate on his face. My parents, beaming. And me, off to the side, holding an unopened juice box. That image hit harder than any slap they'd ever given me. I placed it on my desk beside my framed degree, my business registration, and a photo of me laughing with my team at our company retreat. I had built everything from ashes they left behind. I didn't send a thank you. I didn't text. I got it. I let the silence wrap around them the way it had always wrapped around me when I needed them most. But I lit a candle that night. For the girl I used to be. The one who hid bruises under long sleeves. The one who whispered happy birthday to herself in the dark. The one who swore one day she'd never be in the same room with people who made her feel invisible. And I smiled, not out of cruelty, but out of peace. Because now, I wasn't their shadow anymore. I was my own light. Months passed, and my parents kept trying to claw their way back into my life. But they never apologized properly. Not for missing my birthdays, not for the bruises, physical and emotional, not for choosing silence when I cried out as a child. Instead, they sent vague messages. Family matters more than pride. Or, you'll understand when you're older. But I wasn't a child anymore, and I didn't want to understand. I wanted peace. Then one day, I got a call, not from them, but from the hospital. My father had collapsed at a family event. My brother gave them my number as next of kin. How ironic, after decades of being treated like I didn't exist. I paused. For a moment, I wondered if I should hang up. But something in me, the girl they forgot, the woman I'd become, decided to go. Not out of love, not out of duty, but because I wanted to see with my own eyes the man who once called me ungrateful as he threw a belt across my back, lying vulnerable, dependent. The hospital was cold and too bright. I walked past the nurses with my chin high. When I entered the room, my mother was there, holding his hand. She looked up and froze. Her mascara was smudged, her nails unpolished for the first time in years. "You came," she said like a sigh. "I did," I replied calmly. "Not for him, for myself." My father opened his eyes, weak but still with that flicker of pride that refused to die. "Still angry?" he croaked. "No," I said. "I'm healed, and healing means I no longer need you to validate me or hurt me." The machines beeped. My mother looked like she wanted to speak, but I beat her to it. I pulled a folded paper from my coat and placed it on the bedside table. It was a bill. "For 9 years of rent," I said. "Since you said I was just a tenant, it's time I get paid like one." My mother gasped. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said with a smile. "And I accept cash, credit, or that second beach house you never told me you bought under my name." Her face went white. I leaned in one last time and whispered, "You taught me to survive. Not because you protected me, but because you didn't. Thank you for that." Then I walked out. The girl they beat for asking why they forgot her birthday? She was gone. And in her place stood a woman no longer afraid to send the bill. I didn't look back after leaving the hospital. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. Some goodbyes don't require a dramatic exit, just a quiet door closing. I walked out into the crisp air, feeling lighter than I had in years. The ghosts of my childhood, the missed birthdays, the bruises, the empty chairs, they no longer clung to my skin like smoke. I was free, finally free. But freedom didn't mean silence. I had found my voice, and I wasn't going to whisper anymore. A week later, I filed a civil claim to recover the rent I had overpaid. Not for the money, though it was substantial, but because I wanted them to feel, for once, what it meant to be held accountable, No more invisible suffering. No more, that's just how parents are. I wasn't their punching bag. I wasn't their forgotten daughter. I was their reckoning. Word spread quickly through our extended family. Some aunts and uncles reached out in hushed tones. Maybe this is going too far? But none of them had asked how I survived sleeping outside in the cold after being locked out on my own birthday. None of them brought cake or candles when I was 8 and sobbing alone while the rest of the family partied 2 rooms away. They didn't get to comment now. The court date came, they didn't show. They sent a lawyer. Cowards. But I showed up, in a tailored navy blue suit, head held high. The judge reviewed the documents. My old receipts, text messages, records of bank transfers, and surveillance from neighbors. It was all there. The judge ruled in my favor. The damages were awarded, not just the rent, but emotional distress. The lawyer looked stunned. I didn't blink. I walked out of that courtroom with a check in my hand and generations of inherited silence broken at my feet. But that wasn't the end, because later that month, I bought the community center my mother once tried to keep me from joining as a teen, claiming, "It wasn't for people like us." I renamed it after myself and my daughter, the House of Reclamation. It became a haven for girls like I had been, silenced, bruised, bright-eyed, and misunderstood. We offered therapy, legal help, birthday celebrations for those who'd never had one. Every week, I brought cake. Every week, I made sure no one sat alone. And when I saw a girl in the back one day, barely speaking, staring at the floor like it was the only safe space in the world, I knelt beside her and said, "You matter, even if they don't know it yet." Because I knew what it meant to feel invisible. Months passed. My life bloomed in ways I never thought possible. Not because everything was perfect now, but because I had stopped seeking validation from people who had denied me love from the beginning. That ache in my chest, the one that whispered, "You're not enough," it had finally gone quiet. Then, one afternoon, I got a letter in the mail. No name on the return address, just the familiar scrawl of my father's handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a note, short, shaky. "We lost the house, the car too. Your brother moved out, we're staying in a motel. Your mother's been sick, we're sorry. If you can find it in your heart." I stopped reading. Not because it didn't matter, but because it didn't change anything. They didn't lose the house, they threw away the family, and they didn't lose the car. They sped past every chance to love me. And now, when life had finally turned around for me, they wanted to be part of my peace. They hadn't earned it. They hadn't bled for it. They hadn't buried the girl who used to beg them for warmth and receive silence in return. I folded the letter, placed it in a box labeled past, and left it there, next to the birthday card I once made myself at age 10. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked into the celebration we were hosting at the center that day. It was for a girl named Tiana, turning 13, her first real birthday party. Her smile when we sang, it lit up the room more than any candle ever could. Someone asked me if I missed having a family. I looked around at the kids dancing, the women mentoring, the cake half eaten, and the music playing, and I said, "I don't miss what I never had, but I'm proud of what I've built." And as the music swelled and the lights flickered over the photo wall where we framed every birthday memory we'd made, I took one last look at my old family's photo, the one they once cropped me out of, and smiled, because now I had my own picture, and I was finally centered in it. And now I had made myself unforgettable.